I personally think the benefit of sharing that message of where you're going and how you're going to get there far outweighs anything that would hurt you. All right, we're live for another episode of Dental Riffs, and today I'm super excited because we just got back from an event that we went to, and it was crazy what happened. So I'll kind of kick us off, Tanner, and Tanner and I were both there, and we both got to hang out and have a lot of great conversations, meet a lot of cool people. But first thing I walk into the hotel where the event's being held, and there's a big sign that says, "I'm sorry, our phones are down and our internet is down." So my stomach just drops for Jody, our friend Jody. We both work with Jody, and a lot of our clients work with Jody. And my gut just falls for her because she's planning this event and they don't have Wi-Fi there. I walk up to the desk and they say, "All right, yeah, you have a reservation, right?" And I can kind of tell they're not really sure because their computers aren't really working. And they're like, "Okay, here's your room key. If there's someone in that room, please come back and tell us so we can get you another room." And I'm just like, they've lost all systems, like everything's broken, right? And then Jody gets her car stolen from the parking lot.
Yeah,
it was in a nice area. It wasn't like it was in a bad area or anything like that. It was just absolutely mayhem from trying to manage an event standpoint.
Yeah, no, it was definitely crazy. I mean, going back to that initial kind of like issue or problem with the hotel, obviously, like we've witnessed a lot of changes from going like analog to digital and like the hiccups and problems that is. But it was so interesting to be able to experience that in reverse, right? From going digital back to analog, just from an emergency standpoint, obviously, right? But to see how they pivoted and shifted to that was really interesting. I mean, like you said, like they literally wrote down our names on a piece of paper which room they assigned us to hopefully not double book it, but they couldn't guarantee it, right? There's no
because there was time lapse. Yeah, there was time lapse too. Like people were checking out and then people had to be checked in and you had to let the room service know. And they were literally escorting people to their rooms to make sure they were giving them a room with not people in it.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. Like I got there pretty early. I think it was like 3 p.m. or so. And so it was relatively slow when that happened. But I kind of felt like they didn't give us our own key to our own room, right? So if we wanted to go back to our room, we had to get somebody to escort us. I kind of felt like a prisoner because I was like, oh, I want to go and walk around and go and see if anyone's here or whatever. And I was like, but I can't get back into my room if I do. I literally ordered DoorDash that night just because I was nervous about going and getting food and getting back in that room. It was crazy.
It was very interesting. The event was very good overall. We had a lot of cool conversations. I got to talk to several dentists. We talked to a financial expert about a couple topics, and we also talked to I got to talk to a mall and talk to him about a couple things that are coming down the pipeline. So
this should be a good event. This should be a good episode right now because we've got a lot to talk about.
Hey, before we go any further in the show, I need you to visit a website for me, dentalmarketingmanager.com. If you're a dental office that has somebody managing some of your marketing internally, it's so important that you get them trained. And right now, there is no standard. There is no set of KPIs that people use to build out this position. And so it's been a little bit like the Wild Wild West, but we're aiming to change that. On December 8th and 9th of 2022, we are going to be hosting the first ever Dental Marketing Bootcamp, and we're going to be covering everything that there is to know about being a marketing manager, all the KPIs, how to partner with a marketing vendor, how to build out a position, how to get more patient referrals, 2023 plan calendared out, and everything that you're going to need to manage your dental marketing. And this is not something that you're going to want to miss if you are a marketing manager, and you're not going to want to have your team miss this if you have somebody helping you internally with your marketing. So we hope that you will come. A lot of the SMC clients are going to be there. And if you don't work with SMC, that's totally fine. We still want you there. We want to help you. We want to help your businesses grow. So go check us out, dentalmarketingmanager.com. We have limited space, limited opportunities, and we hope to see you there. Yeah, so I feel like you got some really good stuff. I know we just shot another episode and you were like, man, I got a whole laundry list of things that we need to cover. So why don't you kick us off with some of the topics that you have?
Yeah, so one of the ones that you posted about this recently, actually before the event, that I wanted to chat about was this whole idea of business's secret sauce, right? There's this, like, I think in the dental space specifically, depending on kind of which circles you find yourself in, there's this whole idea of like, oh, I don't want to share with others because I don't want them to know about my secrets or what make us great or whatever. And my mindset, I think, is very similar to yours, Gary, where it's like, really, the more abundant the mindset that we have, the more we're willing to give and kind of hand off to other people, the more it actually comes back to help us and benefit us. And so I'm curious to know, like, do you think that there truly are secret sauces of business that should not be divulged or kind of shared out?
I think like 99% of the stuff should go. There occasionally there's like really fine nuanced things inside a business that you can't even begin to comprehend them unless you're in that business, and
But if you
you
can't
just don't.
comprehend them, couldn't you share them out anyways and nobody just understand it?
Yeah, you could, but it's everybody. There's certain topics, like the topic we just did of that, the last show that we shot with the nuances of treatment and how to present and the guidelines on that treatment. We opened up Pandora's box because you and I were like, yeah, this is, come on, guys, figure it out. And then we brought an expert on, and he was just like, here, think about these 500 other things. And
Right.
then once those 500 things are thought through, then there's 500 more boxes with 500 more things. So there are things that I think will confuse people, but the vast majority of them is, yeah, just talk about everything. And that's my thing, is I just keep talking about every part of my business. And sometimes I'm wrong and sometimes I'm right, but that's not the point. The point is that you're trying to build a community. You want people to come along and help you, and people can relate to the struggles and the good parts as well. And then also the other thing is, if I go through, I've just went through and like listed out like 70 videos that I'm making about dental marketing. You could, as a consumer, go out and watch those videos and become a very effective dental marketer, at least a consultant. But they're like all randomly spread all over the place. It would take you so much energy to go pull all those together that it's like it doesn't make sense to do it that way. So that's my mindset on it.
Do you think that there's ever a time where it justifies it? Like, for example, we'll use the example in the dental space, right? Aspen, I'm sure, has some strategic plan or vision of where they're going to go over the next few years, right? We got Heartland, the same thing. North American Dental Group, the same thing, right? So, like, with these big giant players, where they're obviously playing in a lot of the same space and a lot of these same areas, do you think that there are secrets that should not be shared across these companies that make one better than the other, that the other could not replicate, or could indeed replicate if they got a hold of the information itself?
Like, so, like, give me an example. Like,
I don't
I need
know.
it. Well, okay, so let's just make up an example. So Aspen is the de novo model. So they have a checklist that they follow to launch de novos, right?
Okay.
And so if they handed that to Heartland, would Heartland be able to figure that out? Like, would they be able to go execute it on the level that would actually hurt Aspen?
Yeah, I don't know. And I think that those are the tactical things, if somebody wanted to, are not too hard to get a hold of it, right? Maybe not
Exactly.
like the
Yeah.
checklist, but like, do you think that there's a strategy at the very top level or vision of where they're going that needs to be held private?
For a time, right? So, hey, team, let's make sure we get aligned first and make
Okay.
sure we're all in the same internally. Because sometimes we have ideas. I talk about them with different people before I roll it out to our team, and then we roll it out to our team, and then we go public with it. I don't talk about those things on social media, not because it's secret sauce, but I don't want my team hearing about it for the first time on social media. I've made that mistake before, where my team's like, hey, I literally just had someone on my team like, hey, can you share your social media calendar with me? So that way we know what you're going to be talking about. Like, and so because sometimes I say things on Facebook, and then our doctors that we work with start reaching out to our account managers going, hey, Gary was just talking about this thing. Do you guys do that or not do that?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So there's some of that's involved, but let's assume that you and your team are all aligned and you have this vision. I personally think the benefit of sharing that message of where you're going and how you're going to get there far outweighs anything that would hurt you on the other side. I think that people love vision and they love getting in and coming into that camp. And the more vision you can share and where you want to go, the better it's going to be for recruiting acquisitions, all those kind of things. And I don't think that Aspen really or Heartland wants to do de novo models, right? Like I don't like maybe they do some, but that's not they're not Aspen. It's a totally different approach. It's a doctor centric approach rather than the business model approach of here's the business model that we want you to do. And then Pacific's different than that as well.
Right.
So everybody kind of does it differently. So for me, it's just like talk about the vision, share as much as you can, as humanly possible, that's digestible, and that's going to attract the right people to you, and it's also going to repel the wrong people from working with your organization.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think that you and I are aligned on that, right? Like it's really kind of the more you give, the better off you'll be. So I'd be interested then from anyone listening, if you do feel that there is a time and a place to keep things secret, that's not just alignment of what we're actually working on, et cetera. Like leave a comment in below, let us know. Like we would love to know kind of what your thoughts are around this, because we're always looking for that opposing viewpoint. And Gary and I sometimes will see the exact same way that we want to see somebody that views it differently.
So
because we'd love to chat with you.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that too. And so maybe a good example would be like innovation. So like Google's coming out with a new piece of technology, and they have to keep it under wraps for a while until they get the patents showed up on it. I think that's different than anything that we're dealing with, though.
Yeah, that was one thing that I struggled with when I first started Unify. I was like, oh, I've got this idea that's going to be amazing. And everyone, if I tell the wrong person, they're going to run out and build it right away and they're going to beat me to it. I'm going to be in so much trouble. And I kept having these people around me that I trusted say, oh, don't worry about telling people because everyone's busy doing their own thing. They're not going to be able to do your own thing. Right.
Yep.
And it was it took me a long time to feel comfortable with that. Like I was still like very cautious of like, okay, who do I tell? Who do I not tell, et cetera.
Yep.
And I think it wasn't until like I got far enough down the road that I was like, you know what? I'm okay telling everybody this because you're right. Like people just don't have the capacity and time to do it, even if they had the idea to do it. And there's still like that whole idea of why are you uniquely qualified to be doing this in a way that your competitors can't replicate it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's the passion and energy, especially early on. Like if you were really passionate about this particular subject, other people aren't going to be able to duplicate that. Sure, they might be able to go, oh, that's a good idea. Let's try to remake that. But the passion and energy behind it, they're not going to wake up early. They're not going to keep meeting with people every day about it, every day, all day. That's the part that really sets projects apart, is that passion behind it.
Oh, I agree. That's awesome. That's great insight.
Okay, so I got one. So we were at the conference, and we were talking to a dentist, and I don't know if we're going to bring him on someday or not. So I won't use his name if he cares to comment on this. I know he listens. So, but he brought up gray market materials.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what is that? Even the name sounds stupid, right? Like, who cares about that? No one cares about that. And he said, no, let me explain it to you. So here's what he explained. So he said, all these vendors or these supply companies, they make these products and they sell said product in America for $100, but then they'll sell it to another country for $20.
Yep. They'll
sell it to China or India because just the way the economics works over there, they just they have to sell it for less, which is fine. But then what happens is that these people in America will go get their hands on those products for $10 because they weren't able to use them. They've been sitting in a warehouse. And so they get them for really, really cheap. And then they come and sell them back to America. And it's the same product that was sold in America originally, but there's like, they've been sitting longer and there's other problems. There's other potential for problems in those materials. And a lot of the big dogs do it. He actually dropped some names. He said, this company, and this company, and this company do it. And he goes, I know that they do it because I work with XYZ, right? And he said, is that ethical? And they really push to make it like, hey, we only do work with companies that are, certified and verified and blah, 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 which is true, but they're not telling you that these products were sold initially to India, sat for 2 years, and now they're buying them back and selling them back for full pop to American patients, which may cause issues.
Yeah, I mean, the sitting there problem, I think, is one issue. But even without the sitting there issue, there's the whole idea of going and selling to a different market and that market bringing it back to the States, right? So you could sell it for 100 versus 20, and Mexico, and then they turn around and they bring it back to the States and sell it for 30, right? Like they could literally do that without any necessarily quality issues. But what becomes then the biggest question, though, is there any oversight? Do they still go through the same regulatory like oversight as the other ones that come at the $100 price, right? So
Yeah.
what were your
So
thoughts
do we
on that as you
know?
learned about it?
Do we know? Is the question is like, do we know that? So we know when it's made in America and then it's sold to the dentist, it's verified that it's that product. But when it goes to another country and then comes back, do we not know that it's the same product? Is that what you're saying? Like I remember when pain pills, they struggled with this, where people were making fake pain pills, but they were stamping them, putting them in a bottle, making them look like they were the legit pain pills, but they were knockoffs from other countries. Is that more what you're talking about?
There is gray market on like material that really could affect the outcomes of the clinical work, right? So whatever it is, like the bonding, right? Maybe the bonding that you use is cheaper than other ones, and so it may not be as good, et cetera. And so those are one type of conversation to have with gray market. The other one is where the product itself doesn't actually influence the outcome of the work being performed, right? So those would be things like gauze or gloves, et cetera. And so it's really not necessarily about the one where the outcome isn't affected. That's the biggest problem, right? It's one where the outcome is affected. But the reality is again, going back to that paradigm of providers, that paradigm of what is acceptable and what's not acceptable is completely different from provider to provider. And so maybe the one provider says, you know what, I feel okay using this on a like the bond, because as long as the chemical compound is the same as it is in the brand name stuff, like I'm okay using it, right? And so I don't think
Do you think dentists know this is going on? Do they?
oh
The
totally
dentists know? They do. Okay.
yeah. I was actually kind of surprised that this was the first time that you had heard about gray market material, because it is a pretty common conversation within DSOs in general. Like, are you using these gray market suppliers or not?
So do they know? So do these offices know when they're getting gray market materials?
Yeah, usually certain websites they'll go on. And what was interesting to me about your conversation with this clinician at the event was that some of the big boys are doing it.
Yeah, that's what he said. He said the biggest names that you can name for supplies said they're doing it. And so my impression, though, as we were talking, that not everybody understands that it's happening, that you're getting it and you think it's just the same as the other stuff.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I don't know that. Right. We know
Well, when you worked at a DSO, was that like a conversation that you guys had? Like, hey, this is.
We knew certain websites where you could go get things for cheaper and it was considered gray market material. But in the name, literally gray market, it was like, this is actually fine. Like we ethically feel okay using this.
Got it.
Right.
So it's like the gloves right. As an example.
Yeah. And so there are places to go in and do that, and you can get different types of things. And so some people will do that, but then there's also the whole complexity of like, if you're ordering from 50 different vendors and what happens if they don't ship on time and the customer support's not the same, et cetera. So those always create problems in and of themselves. But
yeah, I'd be interested if anybody is like out there listening. Yeah, we use gray market stuff and we're totally comfortable with it and it's not a big deal. And here's why. Or no, we don't ever use gray market stuff and here's why. I wonder if there's like a mix of people that way, or if it's just a common thing that everybody does.
Yeah, and I think it also kind of depends on what you term gray market, because gray market is not like a clear, okay, you're gray, you're black, right, you're white. Really, it's kind of like whatever. And so you could go in and say, hey, I spent $10,000 on a Dexis intraoral x-ray machine to get the brand name Dexis. But then there'll be people that say this exact same intraoral x-ray is for $3,000 with this other brand, but it's the exact same machine, right? So why should it matter? Well, that's to be questioned, right? Nobody can actually trace it back to the manufacturer and say,
so it's like the knockoff. It's like the knockoff Louis Vuitton bags, but that are made in the same factories as the real ones. They go out the back door.
Totally, yeah.
Interesting. What else you got? I got a couple other good ones.
Let's go with one of yours again.
Okay. So I posted something online and it got way more response than I thought I was going to get, especially on Facebook. LinkedIn, it didn't do quite as well, but on Facebook, I had some serious people responding on it and with their thoughts on it, and kind of counter to my thoughts, which was interesting to me. So here's what I posted. You need to know if you're a manager or a leader. Managers are focused on the today, on managing people and getting the jobs that they need to get done in the short term. And they're really good with working with people. And that's a manager. Where a leader is more focused on the big picture and rallying people together for a common vision. And they are thinking much on a much larger picture. And it's okay if you're not one or the other, but you need to identify which one's your strength, which one's not your strength, and then really hone in on that. And I put on there, like, I'm definitely more of a leader. I'm more than happy to hop on any kind of call with the team and rally the troops and get excited about something. It's not even easy. It's like something that just comes naturally that I have to stop myself from doing. And we're managing people on a week by week basis to hit KPIs and those kind of things. Just it's not something that I'm naturally as good at. I have to really work at it. And then when I've had the experience of bringing great managers around me, I can see the gap between me and them is just massive, right?
Right.
And I've also noticed that the people who are naturally better managers are usually not the best leaders, visionary leaders, I should say, and vice versa, right? And that's just something that I saw. Then, so not a big deal, right? I put that up, I post it. Then I had somebody post on there who's a CEO of a DSO. He's a non-clinician, started super young in the dental industry. His group's growing like crazy, and he's really big on culture and leadership. He said, I think that everybody needs to learn how to lead. I think everybody should be a leader. Everybody on your team should learn these skills to be a leader, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, okay, she had some great points. Then someone else, just as equally influential, if not, she's with the DEO, and Josie, and she said, I think everybody needs to learn how to manage people, and presented the exact opposite side of the leadership side, and listed some great points. Like, and she even said, like, Gary, you're probably better at managing people than you think, and and here's why, based on what I know about you, and they were both really, really valid points. So, like, I started questioning myself. I started second guessing on myself, like, okay, so is it just as simple as, yeah, there's nuance to the conversation and you do have to have a little bit of both, or is there a right or a wrong way to approach this, especially as you go in to build your dental organization?
Great conversation. One that I have loved having a lot inside of my organizations that I've run. I think that I fall definitely in the same boat as you, where I am better as a leader than a manager, because the day-to-day consistencies of, like, hey, follow up with this, like, those things just aren't my passion. That's not what I get drawn to, right? But I've seen that influence negatively at times in the organizations that I've worked in, right? And so because I'm always trying to lead and draw people up to this next level of, like, growth and development that they could be achieving, et cetera, I find myself actually those management skills influencing the outcomes of what we're working on together negatively.
Yeah.
Right. And so I definitely am in of the boat that you need to have both at the same time, and they are clearly distinguishable between the two. And I think that you do probably naturally fall in easier one way than the other.
Yeah.
But I think you have to develop it both ways.
So what I put on the post too is that I've identified I'm a better leader than a manager, but I have to manage people. Obviously, I'm not working in a bubble, right? And so I've used personal assistants and project managers to help me shore up my weakness on the side of stuff that I just I'm not passionate about. I'm not passionate about, cool, every week we're going to look at this KPI and just, minor steps towards that KPI, even though it's very, very needed. To your point, that things can go off the rails if you're always just focused on the next thing, which that's me, then there's a negative consequence to that. What are your thoughts on if someone says, man, I love leading, how do you shore up some of those managerial things? Is it as simple as getting just support from other people, or is it a tangible skill that you learn, or is it something else?
That's a good question. When I was in a very early stage DSO, we didn't have the finances to really build out like a huge supportive team, right? So I didn't have that project manager. I didn't have the executive. And honestly, at the time, I didn't even know how to do it, even if I did have it. But the reality was I just had to buckle down and make that management skill work for me because I didn't have the resources to do it somewhere else. And I couldn't like outsource that
So how'd you do
support to
that? Like,
somebody else.
what did that look like? Was it as simple as just picking one KPI and focusing on that? Or is it like,
I had to make the structure work for me, right? The structure had to be my outsourced support, and therefore kind of the bad guy at times when I didn't want to do it, and not myself, right? So if I sat down to a meeting and there wasn't an automatic structure that the other person knew that we were going to go through, then I knew that I was failing in that type of ongoing relationship of management, right? So we would sit down together and say, okay, here's our management structure, right? These are the KPIs we'll go through that you have to fill out these things, et cetera. And so all of a sudden now I was being held accountable to this structure that we agreed on together. And if I deviated from it, though I was the boss and could deviate from it, I wanted to make sure that I held myself accountable to that structure. And even to this day, like,
so that was in your one-on-one, you were going over the same things every time, or was it more in a team structure? How did you do that?
It was probably a little bit of both, right? Like the one-on-ones are the ones that I'm thinking of that stand out to me right now. But even if I were to go and think about like our group settings where we were following, like we'd have a group of office managers on to look at the performance of the company, it was still about that structure that was important to me because I could easily get distracted by something that I was thinking about and just take the conversation off rail, but
100%.
that would fault my management skills.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons that we moved away from EOS as a company was because EOS allowed you to pull in your emotions, and whoever could argue the top item. Now it served us really well at the beginning, and we still use it in different departments and on a smaller scale, but it really drove emotion. So how we do it now is we have our team meeting, our leadership meeting, or ops meeting, or whatever you want to call it, right? And where we're taking, there's a set number of data points that we're looking at on a structured basis, and there's clear expectations and all that kind of stuff. So that's there. But then in our one-on-ones, we're going over what they need support with and how I can provide support. And I couldn't like, I could run a meeting like, okay, here's the same thing in our one-on-one. But I think that takes away from my ability to be able to help in a different way. So anyways, I go round and round on this one. I want to be helpful, but I also know that I'm a hindrance if you meet with me on a regular basis.
Oh, totally. I'm the exact same way.
Yeah, because it's just like I can easily rabbit trail and take us down crazy paths that we shouldn't be going down, and I have to really control that impulse.
Which is why you and I can meet for 2 days and chat for literally 10 plus hours and still have a million other topics to talk about. It's because we're both visionaries that love looking into the future, that when it comes to like building and executing on those ideas, it just doesn't give us that same amount of energy and excitement.
Yep, 100%.
And that's why, and honestly, to be kind of transparent, right? Like transparency is always helpful. In Unify, this is one of those things that I'm struggling with, right? Like I got out of a DSO where we had a lot of resources. I had a project manager. I had a lot of kind of directors that would handle the build and the execute and stuff. And now that I'm back into a small organization where there's just kind of 4 of us on a team, I'm having to go back into that management aspect a lot more. And it is difficult. It is a struggle every week.
Yeah. So walk me through some of that. Like what's the struggles that you're dealing with?
An example is just to stay focused on kind of what's the most important thing, right? Like this last weekend, I was surrounded by you. I was just surrounded by another one of my close friends, Brad Nelson. We're all visionaries. I love those type of conversations, get energized about them. And as I was sitting there chatting with Brad about like, hey, here's where I think that Unify could go and blah, blah, blah. He did an amazing job of sitting there and being like, hold up, like, what is your core like revenue driver? Like what value are you actually providing right now to make sure that you can bring on customers? And those are amazing questions to ask because those are the things I have to focus on, right? Like who is our current user base right now? Like what is the value that we bring to them as we develop this product, right? How do we make sure that we're constantly adding on more users and making sure that we're providing those values without getting lost in the future of where is this product going to go?
Yeah, because you have to innovate, but you also have to come up with a minimal viable product, right? That's totally. Where you get stuck in between there. So how do you come up with something that people will use today and then be okay with, okay, I'm going to add on or I'm going to bolt on over time. So how's that going?
Especially hard in the sales perspective. Because when I go in and I was like chat with people, I'm always like, hey, do you have this problem, this problem, this problem? They're like, oh yeah, and I also have this, this, this. And I'm like, and it's so easy for me to project into, hey, we're going to be building this in the future to solve this problem. But the reality is now all of a sudden they're setting their value on our product into this future iteration of our product that won't exist for probably a year plus, that I don't want them to be unhappy now.
Yeah.
Right. So I have to constantly be checking myself to say, okay, just sell the value of what we have built, not what
Today.
we're going to build.
Yeah, exactly. And then, yeah, there's also the, hey, this is what we're doing in the future, and it's going to be a year minimum before we have this, but here's what the value is. So, but I that's really, really tough to do. I totally get that.
Yep.
Feel your pain for sure. All right. What do we got? Oh, the other thing, we were talking to a gentleman out there at the event, and he was a finance guy. And we said, what's something polarizing that you could share with us? And he first shared, well, banks aren't loaning money. And that was kind of interesting. But then he said, he brought up that lawsuit that took place. Are we allowed to talk about that or no?
You'll have to refresh my memory, honestly. Like, I can't even remember.
Remember the doctor out of Southern California that sued his bank?
Oh, yeah. That would be interesting to know. I don't know how much they've got protection around it. So I think we use vague terms right now. And then if that person's okay with it, then we'll come back around. But
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So he said, so here's what happened. So he had a partnership. He worked with a bank. He had a bunch of locations. And the bank was super friendly to loaning him money, and they would refresh his credit line. What was it? 100,000 every time, I think you said, or 150,000?
It was like 2 or 3 million. Yeah, they had a line of credit for 2 or 3 million
every time, right? So they would just reset it at so many locations, and they were like, yeah, once those practices are up and going and they're generating revenue, we'll just reset it again, and you go start 2 or 3 more, and over and over and over again. So they everything was going great. They loved them, the bank, and he was like, I'm never going to need private equity. I'm just going to be able to keep doing this and really scale this thing. And then all of a sudden, they were like, "Oh yeah, we sold your loans to another bank."
Yep.
I don't even want to say the name of the bank because yeah. Okay. So that we sold it to this other bank, and so they get on the phone with the other bank, and he was like, I'm still convinced to this day, this bank didn't even know that we were like dental offices. I think they just bought some assets from this other bank, and they were just like kind of filling it out as they went along. And they were like, oh yeah, no, we're not doing any of that. And we're rewriting all the covenants that we have with you. And we're changing all the rules, everything. And if you fight us on any of it, we're calling all of your notes, which is impossible to, like, you're stuck, right? And so they had to kind of go along with it. But this happened to somebody else they were working with, the bank was working with, another doctor who had several locations with them. And he said, I'm suing them. I'm going to sue them, and I'm going to probably win. My lawyers think it's a great case. It's going to take a lot of money. And he asked this other person, do you want to go in on the lawsuit with me? And he said, I can't right now because I'm trying to bridge this relationship, not burn the bridge. Right.
Right.
And this other doctor was like, well, I'm burning the bridge. And he won, and he won big. And like they ended up, it was really big. Like they got a ton of money. Ended up putting him in a really sweet spot. But the other guy ended up not in as great of a position because he didn't sue them. And I just wonder how often this kind of stuff goes on and people can't talk about it. You can't go out there and be like, hey, guess what? I just sued my bank for a ton of money and we're in a really sweet position now. Like, how often is this happening behind the scenes with these locations? And it just made me super curious. Like, I had so many more questions. And it was just, this is one of those stories that I would love to know if there's more of this kind of stuff going on.
Yeah, because obviously from a lending perspective, the word gets out that all of a sudden you've got this like black mark on your record of like, hey, we're not actually that friendly with the people that borrow from us. Nobody's going to want to go borrow from them, and it can affect the business. And so I think that these larger groups that are lending actively in the DSO space, they kind of try to keep their relationship with their vendors clean. Where I think this was a unique situation was that these loans were sold to a third-party group that didn't have really any interest. Like they didn't have any interest in going forth and kind of keeping that reputation positive in this DSO lending space because they weren't going to expand their market in there, right? And so now all of a sudden they're doing these crazy things like changing their terms, changing the amount that they are collecting on, and then all of a sudden like they started actually calling some of the notes, right? Which is puts you in a huge dilemma. So anyways, I thought it was extremely impressive that they fought it, I was glad to hear that obviously that it came out kind of pro DSO on that. But from the rest of the industry's perspective, there's been a few times where these major players in the debt space had decided no longer to participate, right? So East West Bank used to be one of them. There's one back in the day it's been a long time, like Opal or something like that. Like they used to be really big in the space. And I was curious, once they decided to close down these like multi-group location lending, what do they do with those loans, right? Do they just hold them until they end up closing all of them? Do they sell them off to another group, et cetera? And so that's always interesting to me. Or do they get more strict on the covenants and loans with them,
and kind of drive them out, make them refinance?
Yeah, I think that what I've heard right now is that the debt markets are pretty tight right now, industry anyway, right? Like anytime you go into a economic kind of unknown, the debt markets will always be a lot more strict. But and the cost of capital is going up too with rising interest rates, et cetera.
Yeah, what do you think that's going to do for people? Like, how is that going to play out? Is it the big guys keep growing because they have the resources and the ability to do so? Or is it now this is the little guy's opportunity now because it's simpler and easier to buy one more practice than buy a bunch of practices?
This is a great example of, it's just like you can see the indicators that the space is heating up more and more and more, right? So what I mean by that is the individual practice location valuations, they keep rising to an almost unsustainable rate for these DSOs, right? So back in the day, they used to be 2 to 3 times EBITDA. Then they went up to like 4 to 5 times and everyone was throwing a fit. Now it's not uncommon now to even get 6 to 8 times depending on the group, right? And these are specific DSOs that are paying this high, ridiculous amount. So I want to make sure I caveat that, like, don't go up to your local DSO with like 3 offices and expect an 8 times multiple. That's just not going to happen. But there are certain groups that are paying these ridiculously high multiples that to me just doesn't make a lot of sense because the cost of capital is going up too.
Yeah, those are like tech SaaS product multiples, right? When you get up into those 10 in double digits, where you're talking about businesses that are ran by computers, and that's why they're so profitable. But that's definitely not where dental is.
The biggest distinction between the tech and the dental space, though, is what it's based off of, right? So 6 to 8 times is still based off your EBITDA, where once you get into tech, you can get 10 to 20 times, at least you used to be able to get 10 to 20 times based off your revenue, right? So those are very different numbers.
Yeah.
So they're not quite still to the extreme of tech multiples, but for a service-based business, they are extremely high.
Yeah, that's why a lot of private equity wants to move there, right? Because where else are you going to get that return on that money on a relatively safe business?
Relatively safe business that continues to need consolidation. I mean, it's not slowing down anytime soon.
It needs consolidation, and also the majority of Americans still aren't participating in this, so that everybody's projecting that this is just going to keep growing and growing and growing.
Yeah, I think that the consolidation is going to continue to happen, obviously, but then where I think that it will end up shifting more, and this will end up probably benefiting you, is getting more into driving more demand for the services in general, right? So right now, you pretty much ultimately all DSOs ignore the demand for their service. They just try to capture what is out there.
Yeah.
But once you consolidate and you still only have 50% of the population or 30% of the population that are active in dental, going in and increasing that through marketing services, through large campaigns. I mean, maybe dental will be the next Got Milk. Who knows?
Yeah. No, it's very, very interesting. The other thing is technology tends to drive things down, right? So like you had Invisalign when it first came out, it was very expensive, and the cost of it is going to keep coming down, and implants keep coming down. People get faster with it. The technology makes it faster. So making dentistry more accessible because of the cost. So we always talk about inflation, but technology tends to deflate things, right? So like used to, when I was a kid, to have a cell phone, you had to be uber rich to have a cell phone. And now we have supercomputers in our pockets that not only can do everything that the old computers used to be able to do, but much more. And so there's a deflationary action on top of that technology. And I think that's eventually it's going to happen in dentistry as well, with like, especially with the invisible aligners and implants and things like that. At least that's what I think. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is there's still a human, like the biggest cost components of these are still human, right? So
Mm-hmm.
until you remove that human aspect, right? Like you can make more effective aligners cheaper. You can even start getting to the point where we start printing them in office where we don't have these
Yeah.
huge costs out to these third parties. But the reality is the biggest cost is not the cost of the aligner to get clear aligners, right? The cost is still the bodies that are associated with producing that. So until we can
Yeah,
find
but
a
that's where
way,
you have like Clear Choice, or not Clear Choice. What is the invisible aligner company that tried to remove the doctors from the process?
yeah, the
Smile Direct Club.
Candid one, Smile
Smile
Direct
Direct
Club,
Club.
yeah.
Yeah. They try, I mean, the people, they're like, here, fill out
Right.
I actually went through that have you ever gone through that process?
I haven't, no.
Yeah, I actually went through it. So I they had the liners shot to me, or the molds shot to me. I put it on, did everything, sent it back. They were like, "Oh, sorry, it didn't work properly. You didn't do it properly." I have like a bone. I clench when I sleep,
Mm,
so I have like a lot of bone in behind my teeth, kind of built up. So I can't just do regular molds, and so
mm,
it wouldn't work, right? It's like I wasn't a good candidate for just the mold part. I had to go to the dentist, and they had to move that. But they are trying to remove as much of the human element as possible, good or bad. Like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like they're working on that.
yeah, I think they're working on that. But what's interesting though about that is that they're realizing that that's not actually as successful as they anticipated it to be, right? So
Correct.
Candid was one that launched completely direct to consumer and have shifted 180 degrees, and now they're going just only through the doctors,
Yeah.
right? Smile Direct Club is still doing direct to consumer, but even
But
that
they're
has
trying to work
slowed
with
down a
dentists too.
lot,
Yeah,
right?
they're trying to.
They've pivoted and said, you know what, we've got a partner still with the industry, and so even the fact that they've pivoted is a great indicator to me that as much as you anticipate technology being able to remove those people, we're not always there all the time as far as technology goes. And so I think that the outcomes of those direct to consumer models were not as positive as we anticipated. And so it just kind of indicates to me that, yes, you're still going to keep the human element of it for a while.
Oh, agreed. So I eventually I went and got Invisalign.
Okay.
So I went to my dentist. I happened to go to a Pacific dental um, practice, right? And so I go in there and I say, "Hey, I need this." They do the X-rays, they do the molds. They said, "Oh, you got that bone back there. It's tricky, And they had to like cut the mold a certain way and all that kind of stuff. The dentist came in and spent 2-3 minutes, right? They looked at it and they said, "Okay, cool," and they sent it off. And then I had a dentist look at me, maybe spend 5 minutes with me, maybe over the whole
Right.
process. So it was very, very minimal from the time investment that they were actually spending with me. And it was a lot of a dental assistant. Most of the work was done by a dental assistant.
Yep. No, that's true. And I do see that happening, especially in effective businesses. But the reality is I think that there's probably like 5 or so services that we could name in that regard. And so I don't think that dentistry is one of those that's on a deflationary track for expenses. I think that we'll probably maintain, if not inflate, just in conjunction with the rest of inflation. But the thing that makes it interesting is the insurance model, right? So while the cost of gas and milk goes up, we can't necessarily raise in direct correlation the cost of dental expenses because of that.
That makes sense. But don't you think technology can make things faster to be able to lower the price, because the time in chair is going to be like, for an example, me getting an aligner and spending very little time in the office compared to what braces used to have to take.
Yes, I think there are some services like that yes, quantity will definitely lower the cost, right? But certain aspects of it, like
Your cleanings, yeah.
right? That's still so human led that
So
you
yeah,
can't necessarily like speed that up in any way.
yeah. Maybe invent a machine that just cleans the teeth, that just plugs in, and yeah, there you go. That's the next thing Unify should come out with on your roadmap.
There's ways to make it cheaper, right? Like assistant led hygiene, or the hygiene
Yeah.
assistants doing things for the hygienists that don't need to be. And so I think that stuff is happening, especially in areas like Washington, where hygienists are getting paid over $100 an hour.
That's crazy. Yeah, and that's changing the whole business model where they're having, okay, if we're going to pay you this much, then you're going to take care of more of the responsibility of the dentist, and then dental assistants, you got to take care of some of the responsibilities of what the hygienist was doing. Is that bad in the long run, or does it just have to adjust back once more hygienists come into the market?
I think that it is what it is. So from a business perspective, I think that it's better, obviously, right? Like you get more margins. Those margins, depending on how the business decides to do with those margins, whether they take it home or they invest it in other ways that are beneficial to the patient, that's up to each business. But I still think that ultimately, like anytime that there's an efficiency gain or cost reduction, et cetera, like it is.
When you say cost reduction, you mean moving the responsibilities out of somebody who's making this much money down to somebody who's making this much money down to somebody who's making that. Is that what you mean?
Right. Yeah. Like if you look at the services, like A through Z needs to happen on every single patient. And so whether that A through Z is done by somebody that's getting paid $100 an hour, or it's part of it now is getting done by somebody that's getting paid $30 an hour, those are very different like costs, but ultimately the outcome is still the same. Like you still get the same A through Z treatment for your work.
Interesting. Any other topics you want to hit on?
Yeah, one of them is I saw this article recently about, it was from the ADA, and they did a study about what's preventing a full schedule. And this topic, I don't know if you see it on your radar as much, but I see it everywhere, right? Like this no-show cancellation seems to be higher than normal post COVID. Is that something that you've noticed as well in your thing? Tell me about 100%. That.
It's because people are putting people further out. So right now, I just looked at it today, and it's actually come down a little bit, but we track average time to appointment for all of our offices, and we aggregate that up. And right now it's at like over a week. And these are people who are investing into marketing. So you know that they're pushing to try to keep that number down. I imagine, and we're keeping that number in front of them, right? So if you don't have that number, average time to appointment for your marketing patients, like that number is going to be high, and your no-show can balloon really, really quickly, because when people need the dentist, they need the dentist. Now, I'm just looking at the marketing side of it, but I can only imagine what that's doing to the existing patient side.
Do you think that time to appointment is a factor of scheduling inefficiencies within the office, or is it a factor of like higher demand from patients in general? Is it a factor of consumers' demands are different, right? Like I only want to come in these certain hours, and now like because you don't have these hours for the next week, I won't come in for a week.
I think that there are multiple things that are pushing on this market, right? So you have, as time goes on, you're just going to have higher IQ patients over time, right? That's what's going to happen. We understand what Invisalign is now, and we didn't before, and we understand what dental implants are, and we didn't before. And so just people understand things, but that's small. The bigger part is dentists are starting to understand consumerism, and that was never a thing in dentistry. When I got started in it, dentists were like, what's consumerism? Who cares? And now there's people in every market, every single market that you go to, almost every single market, there's somebody who's thinking about the patient first and going, I wonder if I should do morning hours, or I wonder if I should open up some afternoon hours, or I wonder if I should open up some weekend hours. And there's options. So what happens is when these patients call the office, they are going to get an appointment. They're going to lock in that appointment, even if it's further out than they want. And then there's going to be ads for these other people coming in saying same day appointments available. That's one part of it. Now that's a smaller part of it. I think the other thing that's happening, we actually had this conversation when we saw each other over the last week, was on the bucket list of importance for overburdened staff. So there's definitely a labor shortage inside of these dental offices, is following up with patients, and some of these is still not automated, right? And staying in front of these patients, hey, just want to remind you about your appointment that you're coming up, or that you scheduled this appointment. Some of that is still falling through the cracks, and that's going to impact that as well.
So you're saying that the reason why that there's like, I'm going to schedule out 2 weeks because that's when you're available, but I'm also going to be open and available to switch to another dentist if possible, especially new patients, right? Like you haven't committed
100%.
it all.
Yep.
Okay. So that's the biggest reason then that you feel like those are switching. And then obviously, yes, the burden on the staff of what needs to get done, that's getting deprioritized in general. So is there a cure that an office should implement in order to get this fixed?
Well, I mean, yes, there's lots of ways to cure it, but it's like order of importance based on everything else that you have going on.
Right.
So, I mean, if you don't have a hygienist, then no, fixing this isn't your top priority. It's fixing recruiting, and which is a way harder nut to crack than opening up hygiene schedules if you had the hygienist. So I think there's underlining issues. There's also culture issues that I don't think most people address. I think tons of people talk about culture, but I don't think that always trickles down all the way to the office level. I think people are finding better options from an employment standpoint than working in a dental office, and that has to be thought through and realized. And how we've solved it so far is we'll pay you more, but that only has so much upward. That only fixes it to a certain point, and then there's going to have to come like, okay, how can we make this a better experience for the people that are working at this office level? How can we make it so people are excited about coming in for their job? So it's like, yeah, punting appointments too far out is a problem, but how do we solve that? Well, it's hiring, and where are we at with the whole hiring process in the dental industry?
Interesting. Yeah, this is a topic that I hear a lot of. So I would love to get our listeners' feedback on this. Are you experiencing it? What are you seeing that's worked for you, has helped you improve the same day kind of no-show rate within your organization? Is there something in our conversation too that we completely missed that we didn't even take into account? I'd love to get other people's feedback on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the easiest thing to do is just follow up with people, right? Like literally getting in front of people and saying, hey, you want to make sure that you're coming tomorrow still. But that's hard to do when you're slammed. Everybody's slammed
Right.
at the dental office level.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. It's spiking. I know that the no-show rate is crazy though. It's crazy high for a lot of offices. And the other problem that doesn't help with this is that most offices are just looking at a global score as well. So when you start looking at breaking that apart from marketing, new patients, existing patients, it starts to tell a little bit more of a story. But most practices don't have the ability to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that's changing though. That'll change. Cool. Anything else? Anything else we didn't cover?
There's always a million things we could chat about, Gary, but I think this was good for now. I mean, this is a really enjoyable episode.
Awesome, man. Great job. Leave a comment, subscribe, all that stuff. I need to start asking people for reviews and stuff at the beginning. So we'll start working that in.
All right.
Thanks, man.
Talk to you later.
Bye.